Yes, yes.
We are live.
I'm rolling up my sleeves because I'm fitting to get busy.
Mm-hmm. Man.
What's up, man? What are we doing today?
Not much. Okay. I want to talk about this while I can because we won't have time to at all. This is not important at all. But do you know that the biggest crisis in chess, like ever, in the chess world is happening right now?
Oh, no.
Yeah. There's a tournament going on in St. Louis right now.
Mm-hmm.
And the world champion, Magnus Carlsen, has just withdrawn. And it was really vague what he said. But there's this 19-year-old guy that he lost to. His name is Hans Niemann, and he has had this meteoric rise in the last 2 years. Like, he's risen in the chess ratings faster than anybody else ever has. And he just beat Magnus Carlsen, and Magnus just resigned. And this is totally out of character. Nobody withdraws from tournaments like this. And people are speculating that Hans is cheating, and all these chess streamers right now are like looking through the evidence, saying that he can't even analyze his own games, saying that he made up his accent, and that he cheated in the past. And there's this huge potential cheating scandal in the chess world right now.
Well, are they Russian?
No, but it's funny. Hans guy had an American accent, was a total American guy, but in the last he got caught cheating on streaming 2 years ago, and he said he just cheated so he could rise through the ranks online so he could play against tougher players. Says he hasn't cheated since. But since disappearing and coming back, he's gotten this new weird European accent. So some people take that as he's a supervillain now, and he's making it up and he's fake.
What does this mean for global politics?
I don't know, but I like to follow stuff like this because I think Hans did nothing wrong. I think he didn't cheat. I think chess players have always been eccentric. They've always been crazy. Competition has always used psychological warfare, so that's part of the game. And it's good to follow this stuff because when you watch like people create narratives in real time and run with it, in sports, Zion Williamson, player for the Pelicans, there are rumors that he didn't want to play for New Orleans. Like, the media just completely made this up, that he hated New Orleans, that he hated being there. And they just needed a story, and he renewed his contract and everything's fine. Or the Kevin Durant trade rumors that he's going everywhere, but he really just ended up staying in Brooklyn. It's a good way to see how the media works and how anybody can just make up stories.
You know, the media creates reality.
Yes.
What they say ends up being more real than anything else, regardless of what they say. And if they say things in unison, collectively, as they are on many issues, like the Ukraine war is just one example. Climate change is another one. COVID was another one. That becomes the way people organize their thoughts and their lives, their activities, their behaviors, their attitudes, all become organized around what the media says. They choose to live in particular ways according to what the media says. They build institutions according to what the media says. They vote for candidates according to what the media says. They run for office they make a world. They make the world according to what the media says. This is why I think Curtis Yarvin is right when he says that the center of power right now is with the media. You might say, I think he also says it's with academia as well, which is of course an adjunct to the media. That's where they get trained, is in the universities. Journalists these days are people who are called journalists. But I think this is an important thing to understand for people who are on the dissident left and the dissident right. This is a good postmodernist lesson, in fact. Discourse may as well be reality, because if that's the way that people think and operate and behave, then what does it matter if it's factually true or not? And the only thing you can do is come up with a counter narrative that suits your interests and values better. But you're never going to prove or disprove their truth claims. There's no way to establish something as the truth eternally. there will always be challenges to your own truth claims if you make some counterclaims about truth. So just come up with a new narrative, a different narrative that you prefer, that will create a world that you would prefer to live in. But the media creates the reality, whether it's about chess or it's about war in Europe or it's about some pandemic. We have to understand that is where the center of power lies. Now, it might have always been the case. I don't know if Curtis believes that this is a new phenomenon, but I think it's always been the case. And certainly since the advent of mass media in the late 19th century, this is the way that the masses have thought. They've thought according to what the media tells them. And usually that's been a bad thing. Usually it has led to millions and millions of deaths, destruction of all sorts, lack of freedom. But we can also turn it around. We can always create new narratives. That's the beautiful thing about it. The option is always there for us to create new narratives. And that's what we do over here in alternative media. We're just creating new narratives. I don't ever want to say that what I'm saying is true. In fact, I never do. I never would say that, because someone will always be able to come along and come up with some very legitimate, reasonable, logical criticism of my truth claim. But yes, this is why the media is the most important institution. And you could even argue, I think this might even be true, it's more important than even the state. Because what is the state without the media? If CNN and MSNBC and Fox News were reporting differently about the war in Ukraine, the state would have no case. The state would not be able to pursue its objectives in Ukraine. That war is happening, and it's happening the way it's happening because of the Western media. Because the Western media has convinced, simply by reporting its particular narrative, convinced the vast majority of people in the United States and Western Europe and even in the rest of the world. It's quite remarkable. And when you study alternative media on this issue, it's really striking how little people know about the war in Ukraine, even people who study it every day. I mean, I've talked to people on Twitter who don't like what I'm saying about the war, and they're saying, hey, man, I watch and read and listen to dozens of media outlets on the war in Ukraine. And I asked this guy yesterday, I said, well, which ones? And he named them. And it was like at least a dozen outlets, major outlets. Okay, every single one of them, except maybe Reason was the only one. Every single one of them was a major establishment legacy media outlet in the West. And they all say the same thing. They all say the same thing about the Ukraine war. I mean, exactly the same thing. And they are fed that information. They're fed that narrative, that line, by the State Department, by the Defense Department, by MI6, by the British Prime Minister, etc., by the leaders of NATO and the EU. So that is how we end the war. We end the war by overturning that dominant narrative and issuing a new narrative. If you don't believe me, think about the history of the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War was humming along beautifully for the United States, at least in terms of, popular support for it, until 1965, 66-ish. That is exactly when the Western media, newspapers and TV stations, channels, networks, sent reporters into the field, into combat, and they took pictures and they wrote about what the war was actually like on the ground. This is something we don't do anymore. The media doesn't do anymore. And boy, let me tell you, Michael, when we are big enough, which is not even that far away, when we are big enough, we're going to hire a war correspondent to do exactly what the war correspondents did in Vietnam, which is they brought down that war. They ended that war. That's who did it. The media created the war in Vietnam by reporting that everything was going swimmingly for a few years. And then they ended the war by reporting that war was a disaster. Remember, more than half of American adults are functionally illiterate. They read below a 6th grade level. And let me repeat that. More than half of American adults read below a 6th grade level, which means they're essentially illiterate. They can't read anything that's serious, any book or any serious article. So they're going to be ignorant about any political issue, especially when it's about foreign issues. foreign affairs, other countries. Americans are notoriously, ridiculously ignorant about the world outside our borders. They're even ignorant about the world inside their borders, but especially about places like Ukraine or Vietnam. Americans have never known much about the world. They've always been quite parochial. And so this is why narratives are everything, especially in foreign relations and war. We can create a narrative of any kind, the media found out, and Americans will believe it because they don't know a goddamn thing about the Ukraine, or Ukraine as it's now called. So this is why what we do is so essential. And this is why I support alternative media every chance I get. And I wanted to actually make a few recommendations to people. Everyone, if you want to stop this war, and by the way, body bags are just are flooding in to Ukrainian cities near the east because of these horrific so-called counteroffensives that have been launched,
well,
which have been complete disasters. Yeah.
If you care about the civilian population of Ukraine, if you actually care about the civilian population of Ukraine,
yeah,
then go ahead.
Yeah. If you care about the civilian population, if you care about the soldiers, many of whom are conscripts. Remember this: Zelensky sealed off the border, didn't let adult men leave, and conscripted all of them. And they now have press gangs, what used to be called press gangs, meaning the cops going from bar to bar and restaurant to restaurant in Kiev and other cities, basically kidnapping young adult men who are draft dodgers and forcing them and pressing them into the army. So if you care about those people, conscripts, these are slaves being forced to fight in this war that is so complicated. And I am on neither side. I am not on the Russian side, never would be. Hell no. I have no interest in Russia reclaiming its empire, the Russian Empire, which is what this is about, basically. It's also defensive, too. I mean, I am sympathetic to those claims by Russia, that it is defensive. And it's true that the Donbass was being attacked by Ukraine since 2014. I mean, militarily, I mean, deaths, I mean, killing of civilians in the Donbass. There was a military buildup by Ukraine in the Donbass immediately prior to February. This is, again, what precipitated the special military operation, as it's called, or the war. But yeah, if you care about those people, if you care about human death and human suffering, and again, hundreds and hundreds, I think maybe, no, it's thousands just in the last week, just from these counteroffensives, thousands of dead boys, most of them very young men, because of this ridiculous counteroffensive, which was launched entirely for us, by the way. It was launched entirely to convince Americans, especially, and British people, to continue pouring weapons and money into this thing, which is going nowhere except to multiple body bags. If you care about any of this, everyone, please go watch the Duran. It's still on YouTube somehow. It's a miracle that YouTube hasn't taken them down. But Alexander Mercouris and Alex Cristoforo are that show, the Duran, and each of them has their own show on YouTube too. Also, those are must watch. That has now become kind of the nexus for all of the best realist, they call it, thinking on the Ukraine war. And these guys are not lefty anti-war people. They're not libertarian anti-war people, the kinds of people I used to hang out with. These are what's called realist people who just simply, they try to see the world at least as pragmatically as possible. They're non-ideological, non-idealistic. And so they're not interested in sort of grand plans to transform the world through various interventions like idealists do, like the foreign policy establishment in this country often does. They simply want to avoid war, stop war from happening. They want bad things. They want to stop bad things from happening in the world. And they see this war, the West's support of this war, as creating nothing but death and destruction. And so they simply want to find a way out and counsel a way out. And the way out is to end sanctions. But that's for the next subject.
Yeah, I was watching recently. They're on Odyssey as well, and they're not shadow banned on Odyssey. They're shadow banned on YouTube. So if you search stories and you search content, it might be hard to find the Duran just in your search results. Just the way that the YouTube algorithm works. They're much easier to find on Odyssey. But I was watching their stuff from like a year ago, and they really aren't ideological. They are just talking about what's happening in Europe. Yep. Just pretty as factual or dispassionate as you can get.
Let me say something else. I just saw this yesterday, I think. According to the report I saw, YouTube has has banned, I got to shut up this dog in a second, has banned 9,000 YouTube channels because of their reporting on Ukraine. Now, there was, I mean, I'm 100% against this. I think this was totalitarian as well, but at least there was an argument for shutting down channels that were putting out COVID alleged misinformation. If they actually were, then okay. At least there's an argument to be made there, right? That it's about public health, public safety. Fine. Although I don't buy that either. But when it's about a question of foreign policy, U.S. foreign policy, war and peace, when it's about that, how on earth are they justified in censoring that information, even if it's completely wrong? This is the next level of totalitarian control since COVID. If we are no longer allowed to think and speak against the government's foreign policies, then there is no freedom. There is nothing worthwhile in what we do. It is hopeless. I mean, it's amazing that Iran is still going. I was worried before we started rolling here that we might get taken down for this. Who knows? I mean, their algorithms, their search bots could find the words that they don't like, and poof. And by the way, they take down the entire channel permanently when this happens.
We are definitely shadow banned and demonetized. All the time. And shameless plug, if you want to send a foreign, if you want to see me in a bulletproof vest with radio gear on in Ukraine, please send a super chat, because a foreign correspondent, you need to pay for that. But
I already have a foreign correspondent lined up. Danny Sherson has already agreed to do it.
Oh, sweet.
He wants to be sent over. When we get the money, we will send his ass to Iraq, and he's going to do reporting from the cities and towns that he invaded once as a member of the U.S. Army, as a major in the U.S. Army. But yeah, I want Patrick Lannister, I think his name is the only on the ground reporter I've heard of in Ukraine. He's great. He puts out, I mean, I don't know. He seems like he might have a particular ideological bias, but at least he's reporting on what it looks like, what's really going on the ground in these towns and cities, especially in eastern and southern Ukraine. We need many, many more of those people, just like during Vietnam. And again, that is exactly why the Vietnam War ended, was because of the media. The media did an actual good job and really reported from the field there. So we'll do that one day. There's going to be an unregistered war correspondent coming soon as we have the money.
No, and since Vietnam, they know that's why. So they made every effort to make it harder and harder to report from war, and every effort to make it harder and harder to see the actual human cost and what's actually going on, because it's not popular. It's just not.
Yep, exactly. I have much more to say about this. Of course, this is what I've been studying pretty religiously for a few months now. A lot to say about it. And it's, understand that it's quite difficult. It's complex. It takes a lot of research to understand what's going on any level. But I will say this. The war in Ukraine is the most important news story in the entire world, and has been for many months. The consequences of this thing are looming. We've already felt them. Gas is however expensive it is, but in Europe, they are on the verge of a historic crisis where you will see quite likely governments fall. You might even see some governmental apparatuses fall. You might even see governmental structures fall, not just the party in power suffering, but whole systems within these countries, political systems might fall apart because of this. There were, over this last weekend, major marches in several major European cities, tens of thousands of people in the streets. And I'm talking about in the heart of Western Europe, where NATO has always been popular, super popular, unfortunately, though it's sort of understandable, but people calling for their countries to leave to leave NATO. I mean, I haven't seen this. I haven't seen mass rallies in Europe calling for leaving NATO. I don't think ever, not on this scale anyway. Mm-hmm. So this is a big deal. And then, I guess we're going to talk about the coming energy crisis in Europe, which is everyone needs to be following this. This is the story, and it will have effects around the world. It will affect us. It will affect everyone. When the European economies go under, which they're about to, and people in Berlin and London can't heat their homes, in the winter, which is exactly what's about to happen, unless there's some miraculous bailout. I don't know how, but I mean, this is, all those governments are in full panic mode. But at the same time, they are pledging to do whatever it takes, including against the wishes of their own voters, and including starving people and depriving them of heat in the winter to win this war for Ukraine, for Zelensky, of all people. Because, again, the empire, the American-led empire, is the most important thing to the political leaders of the West. They've built their whole careers on this. They've invested their whole heart and soul into the American empire, into building NATO and the EU, and doing the wishes of Washington, and building a fortress in Europe against Russia, which is their only opponent. This is how committed these people are to the empire. They're willing to even harm their own people, lose political support. And it is remarkable because Putin has never once indicated an interest in going outside the sphere of the former Russian Empire. He has no interest in going into Poland or Czechoslovakia, and certainly not into Germany or Western Europe. He couldn't, even if he wanted to, even if he tried to, he'd get smashed. So this guy is no threat whatsoever to any of us, to anybody living in Berlin or Prague or Vienna or Paris. So why on earth are we sacrificing, not to mention all the money we've given them, taken from tax money, from our money, tens and tens of billions of dollars of our money have been funneled into this fucking war. And all it has resulted in is dead Ukrainian boys. And Putin hasn't been slowed down one bit. He's taken the east, he's taken the south of Ukraine, and he's going to hold them. And next stop is the Baltics, most likely. You know, and what are we going to do then? I mean, again, will we sacrifice our own children, our own sons, to save Lithuania from becoming a part of the Russian Empire again? I mean, again, there are many people in Lithuania who don't want this, and I'm sorry for them, but this is not the answer. It is not our fight. It is not our war. So everyone, please watch the Duran.
Mm-hmm. All right. Before we move on to Europe and the energy crisis, you brought this up and media literacy. Have you seen this media bias chart that it's been floating around for a few years? But that person that you talked with on Twitter probably has seen this and probably thinks that because he follows something like this, that he's an informed person. And I've seen this used in schools. I've seen this used in public school, journalism school. It's kind of hard to read, but up in the center, yeah, so on the x-axis, you've got like factual reporting, or sorry, the y-axis, right? Man, forget my math. You got factual reporting, and then left to right, you've got the bias, the kind of bias they have, and then as you go farther down, you've got less factual, going into conjecture and conspiracy theory. So all the way on the far right is a show that you recommend everybody follow daily, Steve Bannon's War Room, the least factual and most biased show according to this. And then on the farthest left and farthest down, notice that there is nothing as bad on the left. There is nothing as factually incorrect on the left as there is on the right. But the most factually incorrect show is the Jimmy Dore Show, another show that you recommend.
Oh, yeah. Wow, yeah. Yeah, that's impressive, given that MSNBC, which is over there on the left, takes all of its direction from the Democratic Party. I mean, directly. I've been watching the legacy media lately, or the establishment media, whatever you want to call them, the liberal media. I've been watching MSNBC lately because I've just been curious about how they're reporting on these issues, and it's shocking. And even Chris Hayes, who's a very smart guy, and I used to have a lot of respect for him, and he used to be like a real genuine intellectual. He wrote for major intellectual journals. He used to write for The Nation, and very smart guy. He used to have a lot of good things to say. Even he, I mean, all they do is they repeat like this 2 or 3 same talking points. And it is just like politicians. It's just the way that politicians speak. They just repeat the same talking points, and they never bring in countervailing opinions. They never bring in dissident voices or a counter argument at all. They just keep pumping it out, which of course is the hallmark of what? Propaganda. The Young Turks. Wow, they're all the way over. They're very factual, huh? Oh, Joy
They're
Reid.
moderately factual.
Joy Reid is factual. Oh, I see. I got it. Okay.
Yeah. It's all comparative.
Oh,
the most
news
factual is the AP and state propaganda over at PBS.
PBS.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. Yes, the News Hour. Yes. Okay. Right. These are the people who have been reporting that Ukraine's been winning the war since February. I mean, do we need to say anything more? They've been reporting that Ukraine is winning the war since February. Hello. I mean, that's it. That's all you need to know. I mean, that is so clearly wrong. Even some of them have been admitting it lately. So clearly wrong. And we can talk about that. We can talk about these counteroffensives and what bullshit they are and how they are not going anywhere. Ukraine is not winning this war, never has been winning the war, and has almost no chance of winning the war unless the NATO countries put actual boots on the ground or use their air forces to bomb Russian positions. But everyone knows who's followed this in any way. Just look at the damn military maps. Military Summary is a great YouTube channel, by the way. He just goes through the military maps. He shows you exactly where all the forces are, the Russian and Ukrainian forces are arrayed, and he shows how they've been moving. And it's just been a very steady, consistent march forward by Russia. And the positions have not changed even since the offensive began. They went right back to where they started. So yeah, what are you going to do? I mean, so this part of, I mean, the whole thing about evaluating objectivity in the media is just is a stupid American thing to begin with. American journalism, and I'm not even sure why this is true, but American journalism has had this tradition of claiming objectivity, or at least holding out objectivity as the standard, right? The more objective you are, the better journalist you are. That's not the case in Europe. They sort of dispense with that. They don't even pretend to be objective, and they just let newspapers proliferate with various points of view, and they fight against each other. They argue against each other. This is changing somewhat now that everyone sort of rallied around COVID and Ukraine, but for a long time, I know in the British media, which I used to follow pretty closely, I mean, it was wonderful. You would have sort of like socialist newspapers and conservative newspapers and liberal newspapers just going at it from their own perspectives, which I thought was a way better way of understanding what's going on than reading reading all the newspapers in the United States and watching all the TV networks saying the same thing, all pretending to be objective, which simply is, in American terms, being objective in our country, in the media here, is simply the closest, it is the closest adherence to the official policy line. Whatever the government essentially is saying, the closer you get to that, the more objectively true you are.
Mm-hmm. The ones you can believe are the ones that Joe Biden keeps calling on. Those are the reporters that are the most truthful and the most factual.
Yeah, well, I mean, he's the president, so he must have something going. He must be right about most things, right? Because he's got all the sources, he's got all the resources, he's got all the ability to see things. And of course, he's a good man because he's the president and he cares about Americans. He cares about people.
The idea of objectivity in American media, though, is kind of a new thing, right? Because the revolution, you had all these competing newspapers. Yeah. Would you say it's a post-World War II thing? And it's definitely a TV thing. I would say that even early 20th century with yellow journalism, you had the perspective. Well, William Randolph Hearst kind of had a dominating thing in the New York Times when certain newspapers got big. But like for a long time, papers were open about their bias. And that was the American way, is that you just read what you agreed with, or everything's a rag is how it used to be.
Interesting history lesson, Mr. Weimer. Yeah, I'm the historian here. Why are you correcting me? You might be right. Now that I think about it, the penny press, so-called penny press of the early 20th century was quite ideological and quite diverse, which is the important thing. The New York Times, who I used to work for, in fact, I used to do historical research for the New York Times. Did they pretend to be objective back in 1900? Maybe not, actually. It could be a post-World War II thing. That's right. But the British, and as far as I know, and the French too, never did that. They never adopted that model in journalism. They just let ideological factions have at it. They don't ever pretend. It's not a thing in French or British culture to pretend to be objective. So yeah. So this whole thing about, measuring objectivity in the media, the premise of that is problematic. The premise of that is silly. completely silly. Really, Alex Jones is less factually correct than Rachel Maddow. Well, let's do this. Let's have this out. Let's list the 500 things that Alex Jones has claimed over the last 10 years and compare them to the 500 things that Rachel Maddow has claimed over the last 10 years and see which one has been right about more stuff. We all know, if we know anything about Alex Jones, he's been right about a whole lot of things. Even the damn gay frogs, apparently. He had there was some truth to that. You know, and Rachel Maddow is the one who was telling us about Russiagate every day for 3 years, telling us about how the vaccines were going to stop the virus in its tracks. That was Rachel Maddow. Objective, huh? Okay, cool.
Yeah, all the media that reported that the vaccines prevented transmission, that repeated that it was a government line. It was a government lie, and you know, if you did, but now, you know, yeah,
and Putin runs the Republican Party.
Yeah,
that's obvious. I mean, she said that for 3 years.
Okay. Okay. All right. This will tie in when we talk about Biden's speech, but I want to talk about this now since we're on it. They call MAGA Republicans, they call their opponents election deniers. They use that term denier. And that's a very specific term that's meant to subconsciously lump them in with, the first time they use this term was for Holocaust deniers. And then they use that again later for climate deniers, and they're using it again for election deniers. And they're painting an objective truth claim. Anybody who casts any aspersion or doubt on the accepted narrative of the thing is a denier, and there should be laws against them. They should not be allowed to run for office. They're a threat. They're violence. Like, you know, if you deny climate change, you're going to destroy the world. So we must punish them. If you deny Holocaust, you're going to cause another Holocaust to happen. We must punish them. You know, if you deny the election, you are an insurrectionist. You are a bad person who needs to be locked up because you are a violent enemy of the people.
So in 2000, many of my friends in New York, I was living there at the time, went into the streets and filled the streets with hundreds of thousands of people protesting what they said was a fraudulent election. Fraudulent election. Bush was not the legitimate president. It was stolen. It was a stolen election. Bush stole the election. The Republicans stole the election. The Supreme Court stole the election. It wasn't a legitimate election. That was Democrats, that was liberals, even some leftists were saying that. That's fine. Same thing happened 4 years later.
Yep.
People forget this. Same thing.
Ohio.
04. Yeah, the 04 election, same thing. No, that wasn't real. That wasn't a real election. That was fake. That was phony. That was stolen. And then, of course, 2016. I mean, not only did they say it was rigged, they said it was rigged by a foreign power. That's a big claim. My God, if you want to say that democracy in America is faulty, boy, just claim that some foreign power determined who the president is. But, you know, that's fine. That's fine. And when Steve Doocy confronted my future wife, Corinne Jean-Pierre, recently about this, she had nothing to say, as usual. I mean, I swear to God, she needs to spend more time with me. It's gonna be good for her. She really doesn't know anything. She doesn't know anything about anything. She called the Nord Stream pipeline the Nordstrom pipeline.
You know where you go to get your shoes, the Nordstrom pipeline.
Yeah. So Putin is so evil that he is shutting off the Nordstrom pipeline. There will be no more department stores because of him. He'll stop at nothing. This man is truly the world villain that we need to stop. Yeah, so she knows nothing. When she was confronted with this, she herself said that, of course, the 2016 election was fraudulent, that Donald Trump was not the legitimate president. She just had nothing. She just said, well, that's just ridiculous. That's a ridiculous
here and now. That was another thing she said. We're talking about the here and now. Let's not litigate the past. Let's talk about what's relevant right now.
Yeah, no. I really do think she's a good person underneath that, though. I'm just saying. I'll just keep saying that in public until she hears me.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't think it's possible to be a competent to be a coherent spokesperson for the regime. She's just in a bad position. She just needs to take a vacation, maybe become a correspondent for someone else.
They need someone who's a lot smarter. because it's very tough job to be the spokesperson for Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. I mean, can you imagine trying to make sense of what they're doing and trying to persuade people that what they're doing makes sense? That's nearly impossible. So even though she's not the most gifted, I'm sorry, Corinne, I love you, but you're not the most gifted person. You're not a tremendous intellectual, I don't think. They need someone way smarter to make horse shit into ice cream or whatever it's called. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. I want to show the protests in Europe, and fans of the original Unreported show that was over on patreon.com/unregistered will remember how we showed all the protests that weren't reported on for the COVID restrictions. We showed Italians burning their vaccine passports, and there's a similar thing happening in Italy right now with their energy bills. They're burning their energy bills.
Ma non tutti insieme, fate cura. Non ne vogliamo più. Lavoro, lavoro e niente più. Siamo tutti di aspettare. Noi vogliamo lavorare. Siamo tanti di aspettare. Noi vogliamo lavorare. Aumentano le tasse. Aumentano le tasse. Diventano i salari. Diventano i salari. Con i soldi pagano i militari. Con i soldi pagano i militari.
And then to show that this isn't coming out of nowhere, the people who are, oh, everything's fine in Italy right now. Here's what's happening right now. They're blacking out their restaurants at certain hours and they're going by candlelight, and that's actually happening. So I'm gonna show that. Yeah.
Come si lavora al buio? Lo riesci a fare cocktail con questa penombra?
Speriamo di sì.
Wow. To protect us from Vladimir Putin. Vladimir Putin, who wants to do nothing to us. Not a thing. Not a thing, except give us oil. Sell us oil. That's all he wants to do with us. That is all he wants. And this is what. So in the UK, I think it was yesterday, one of the big game shows there offered as one of its prizes payment of your energy bills for 3 months. That was on a major game show. That's what you got if you won the game. You got your energy bill paid for by the game show. This is quite something. Quite something. I mean, I feel, on the one hand, I feel very bad for the people who live in Western Europe because of what's coming, but I'm also sort of excited to see what they do about it. The people of Europe look like they might very well rise up in major numbers and do some serious damage to the ruling elites there. I think regimes are going to fall. I think political parties are going to be destroyed. I think there will be major realignment in European politics. I think that NATO and the EU might fall apart. I think the EU might fall apart faster than NATO, but I think even NATO is in deep trouble. But boy, when you can't heat your house for some foreign war, are you going to vote against the government? I think so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's compounding with the farmers, with COVID, everything. Like, I don't know if there's a coherent national populist response. Like, that's my one problem with Europe is I don't see any good candidates anywhere that offer an alternative. But I do see crowds growing within the tens of thousands every time the government does something that they just can't go along with. And it's all unilateral from the EU. It's all completely, it's always everybody at once all the time doing the same thing to their people. And the people of Europe just aren't hip to it anymore. I mean, I could show you more videos from Germany. I could show you videos from France, and they're smart too. They're saying we need to get out of NATO, and they're saying we need to stop the sanctions on Russia. They're getting a lot more informed, and they're actually getting pretty angry at the United States because they don't see any part in the Ukrainian conflict. They see that all as a Western aggression that they have nothing to do with.
Yep. Yeah, we're gonna cut off our major supplier of oil and gas, Russia. This is Germany especially, but also Sweden and Austria, other countries too, and Britain. Major supplier of oil and gas. And then on top of that, we're going to put major restrictions on what you can use in production as a farmer because of climate change. I mean, no wonder those Dutch farmers are out there whooping ass on cops every day. I mean, God bless them.
Mm-hmm.
Can you imagine? I mean, for two things you can't even see in the world, like a war in Ukraine way over there, and this climate change thing that, again, I'm waiting to see it.
Well,
yeah.
Even if it's real, even if it's 100% real, even if it's as bad as all the scientists say it is, and even if it's as bad as all the CNN reporters who interpret the scientists say it is, who should bear the brunt of that? Should the people bear the brunt of this emergency? Or should we maybe stop sending tanks and bombs to countries, that takes up a lot of carbon? There's a lot of ways to solve this problem. Maybe we should get on a nuclear energy grid. Maybe we should use fossil fuels and some potential. Maybe we should try to extract carbon from the atmosphere. There's, politicians, if they cared about their people, they'd be working on a solution to where you not having electricity is not an option.
Well, here in California, they've banned gas-fueled cars.
Mm-hmm.
Soon. You won't be able to buy a brand new gas-fueled car. You have to buy an electric car if you want a new car. And
you can't charge it.
Yeah, where's the electricity come from?
Mm-hmm.
Just like rubbing your hands together real fast? No, it's from the burning of fossil fuels, you fucking idiots. So they're not serious. They're serious about social control,
yes,
which is what they get from climate change hysteria. They get to control people. It's what they got from COVID hysteria. They got to control people. And they clearly weren't very serious about that. We know because none of them wore masks when they went out to dinner. So now we know. Now we know what these people are about, what these political leaders are about, is controlling us. They're not true believers. They're not true believers in climate change or in the war in Ukraine or in COVID. None of that. They really want power and they want control. I wasn't sure about that for a long time, honestly. I thought many of them were true believers. They really did think that we were going to be underwater in 10 years and that Putin was Hitler on steroids and that COVID was going to kill everybody. No, they really just want control.
I think it's doublethink. I think it's, yes, they are true believers, or maybe a lot of them are rubes to the official narrative, or they, the official narrative is the only thing that occupies headspace in their mind. Like an alternative vision of the world just literally does not enter their heads.
Yeah.
But they also think they're better than everyone else and that they deserve power, and that bending the rules is something that they get to do because they're better than us.
Mm-hmm. Again, though, more than half of Americans are functionally illiterate. So it's in some ways they're right. I mean, they are vastly more educated. I mean, at the end of the day, and I hate that phrase too, I take that back, fuck end of the day. We must always remember that ultimately, that's the word, ultimately, it is the fault of the American people. They're the ones who voted for these people. They're the ones who let them rule. They're not rising up, even in protest. Have there been any anti-Biden protests? Even MAGA is not like having anti-Biden protests. There were anti-Trump protests. There were anti-Nixon protests. There were anti-Johnson protests. There were anti-Reagan protests. I remember those in the 1980s. I attended a few of them. There's no anti-Biden protest. There's nothing. There's no anti-Democratic Party protest. There's no anti-NATO protest. So these people are getting what they deserve. I'm sorry to say. It's just too bad I live among them.
Mm-hmm.
But, I think we need to get off of attacking the politicians.
Yes.
Politicians are there. The politicians are there and can do what they do because the people let them or even encourage them. I mean, look at COVID. Put on masks, you seals. Okay.
Yeah. No, I never had to worry about the government. I only had to worry about my neighbors who took this thing seriously.
Yeah, exactly.
Those whole 2 years, yeah.
Yeah, and put it the other way around. I mean, if the people did not obey the masters, our masters, the government would have virtually no power over us.
Yes.
And there have been moments like that, even in American history, and Americans have been generally pretty compliant with the authorities. But, in American history in the 60s and the 20s, there have been moments where there's been sort of widespread skepticism toward authority. And that led to a lot of good stuff. And it meant that the government, federal, state, and local, just couldn't do much, like impose prohibition, for instance, in the 1920s, right? That was the law of the land, and they hired thousands and thousands of cops to enforce it. And was it enforced? Was prohibition really the law? No. I mean, people were drinking like fish. They drank more in the 1920s than they did in the 1910s. And that's not because the government was less competent or stupid. It's because the people did not obey. And most importantly, they lost respect for authority figures and the government in particular. If you look at all the gangster movies of the 1920s, the major theme is disrespect toward police. This is what I want to bring back. I want to bring back that anti-authoritarian, anti-state, anti-cop attitude that was prevalent even among middle-class, ordinary Americans in the 20s. We got to have more of that.
Wow. Okay. Dang. I want to talk about the Biden speech, and you brought this up.
Okay.
The people. It's stop blaming the politicians. You should know better than this. Everybody was talking about this speech that Biden gave, and they're like, this speech came out of nowhere. This demagoguing half the country, singling out political enemy. This thing came out of nowhere. It didn't. I'm gonna play what is ancient history now. This is from April 25th, 2019. This is the campaign ad of which Joe Biden used to announce his presidency. The ad.
Cool.
Charlottesville, Virginia is home to the author of one of the great documents in human history. We know it by heart. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, endowed by their Creator with certain inalienable rights. We've heard it so often, it's almost a cliche, but it's who we are. We haven't always lived up to these ideals. Jefferson himself didn't, but we have never before walked away from them. Charlottesville is also home to a defining moment for this nation in the last few years. It was there on August of 2017 we saw Klansmen and white supremacists and neo-Nazis come out in the open. Their crazed faces, illuminated by torches, veins bulging and bearing the fangs of racism, chanting the same anti-Semitic bile heard across Europe in the 30s. And they were met by a courageous group of Americans, and a violent clash ensued. And a brave young woman lost her life. And that's when we heard the words of the President of the United States that stunned the world and shocked the conscience of this nation. He said there were, quote, some very fine people on both sides. Very fine people on both sides? With those words, the President of the United States assigned a moral equivalence between those spreading hate and those with the courage to stand against it. And in that moment, I knew the threat to this nation was unlike any I had ever seen in my lifetime. I wrote at the time that we're in the battle for the soul of this nation. Well, that's even more true today. We are in the battle for the soul of this nation. I believe history will look back on 4 years of this president and all he embraces as an aberrant moment in time. But if we give Donald Trump 8 years in the White House, he will forever and fundamentally alter the character of this nation, who we are, and I cannot stand by and watch that happen. The core values of this nation, our standing in the world, our very democracy, everything that has made America, America is at stake. That's why today I'm announcing my candidacy for President of the United States. Folks, America's an idea that's stronger than any army, bigger than any ocean, more powerful than any dictator or tyrant. It gives hope to the most desperate people on earth. It guarantees that everyone is treated with dignity and gives hate no safe harbor. It instills in every person in this country the belief that no matter where you start in life, there's nothing you can't achieve if you work at it. That's what we believe. And above all else, that's what's at stake in this election. We can't forget what happened in Charlottesville. Even more important, we have to remember who we are. This is America.
Nice production work there.
Mm-hmm.
They made him look good, sound good. He sounded very presidential. A lot of gravitas. The backing music was very moving and uplifting. And the myth of Charlottesville lives on, continues to have tremendous power, even though it is utterly fraudulent.
Yes.
There were how many actual Nazis and Confederates were there? 100, couple hundred, maybe?
That's generous.
Yeah. Okay. Maybe three digits. Mm-hmm. And by the way, among the people who were marching was our good friend Michael Malice, a libertarian Jew. He was there. He actually gave a speech, and he gave a speech about drag shows. People don't know this. Michael Malice gave a speech about drag shows at the Charlottesville, what was it called? March for the Right? Something like that.
Unite the Right rally.
Unite the Right rally.
Mm-hmm.
Michael Malice was one of the speakers at the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville, and he spoke about RuPaul's Drag Race. Yeah, Michael's not a Nazi. And so there's that. Then there is the fact that Heather Heyer,
mm-hmm.
this person who was killed, she was hit by that car. Although actually, if you look at I've studied the film, the footage of it, it's possible she wasn't actually hit by the car. She was obese and she was a thug. There is a lot of video footage of her acting like a straight up thug leading up to that. But she was extremely unhealthy and obese, and she got knocked over actually by someone else, I think, who may have been hit by the car. And she died not because of the injuries from the car accident. She died because of her lack of health. And do we even know the guy who was driving that car? Was he really a Nazi? He was being surrounded and attacked by a mob who were hitting his car, throwing rocks at him, and they were trying to trap him in that alleyway, that little street there. And he's trying to get away. It was actually, he was trying to escape. It was not offensive. It was defensive.
It was white on white crime too. But
yeah,
there's that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right.
All the violence that happened was because of the local police at Charlottesville. Instead of doing what you normally do when there's a politically contentious rally, you keep the counter protesters away from the protesters. They forced them to collide with each other. They forced the Charlottesville protesters, the Unite the Right people, to exit towards the Antifa counter protest. So there was a violent clash in the streets.
Right. Oh, the other thing about Charlottesville is that, and again, I've looked at a ton of footage. I've studied this quite extensively. I have not, still to this day, I have not seen one instance of unprovoked violence by the right wing at that event. All the violence I have seen was by the left wing counter protesters.
Throwing bottles of piss, throwing rocks, throwing punches. Yeah.
Yeah, it's the opposite. It is the opposite of the myth of Charlottesville.
I can show you footage of Richard Spencer yelling at police, arrest us, please. We don't want to go in there and fight. We just want to leave. Arrest us right now. And the police are pushing the Nazis towards Antifa, towards the counter protesters.
Yeah. And by the way, Nazis who wear white polo shirts and khakis, and they're like 20-year-old dudes who probably might belong to a fraternity at some major state school. Like these are the stormtroopers we're supposed to be rearranging our lives around, and that should dictate politics and policy. Because of them, we need to censor people on the internet. Because of them, we need to have surveillance of everyone. Because of them, we need to have political prisoners, which we do now. It is one of the most horrendous myths in American history.
And the good people on both sides line, which is the foundational myth of the Biden campaign,
right?
Is that Donald Trump praised Nazis. Is Donald Trump was talking about people who have a certain opinion on the Confederate statues debate, who got wrapped up in the events of the day and didn't know they were being lumped in with the few Nazis who happened to be there.
He's talking about Michael Malice.
He is talking about Michael Malice, exactly, yeah.
Michael Malice is a very fine person.
Very fine person.
Can't deny that.
Very fine.
And certainly not a Nazi, that's for sure. Jewish anarchists tend not to be friendly toward Nazis.
Mm-hmm. And the bad people on both sides. There were violent agitators on both sides, some of which might have belonged to a certain 3-letter organization. But
there's that too. That's right. Yeah, right.
Oh, dude, Gavin McInnes before that event said, "Don't go. There's feds there." Like anybody who's smart on the right was like, "This reeks of feds. I don't know anything about these organizers."
Remember that guy who was the organizer of the whole thing of the Unite the Right rally? Remember that guy? He got accused of being a Fed, and then it sure looked like he was. He gave this weird press conference in which he looked really suspect, and then he kind of disappeared. I think he was a Democrat originally, and then he did this thing, and then he disappeared. I would bet money that he was working for the feds in some way or another, because we know now. I mean, we've known for a while actually, but we certainly know now that the feds have completely mobbed up every far right organization there is in this country. Every far right, white supremacist, racist Klan organization, and there's only a handful of them, and they each has like 10 or 20 people in it. But there are more feds. Brandon Caserta told us this. He's found this out the hard way. He spent a year and a half in prison because of this. They are completely full and often led by agents of the FBI and Homeland Security.
Yeah. We're talking about Malcolm X.
Yeah. In the class.
In our class, unregisteredacademy.com. Monitored by the FBI, but also that Spike Lee movie, Black Klansman. It's funny, you kind of broke down some of the biases in the Spike Lee movie that weren't necessarily true. And it's funny that like Black Klansman, Spike Lee is rooting for the feds infiltrating an extremist group, right? Like that's how far we've gone. And in that movie, it's based off of pure fiction. The bombing that happens in that movie never happened. It just didn't. There was actually no violence from that group ever. It's another pure fiction to go after Trump.
There is a strong chance that the FBI assassinated Malcolm X, or at least had something to do with it. I mean, the two men who were arrested and charged and convicted were members of the Nation of Islam. And there was a lot of infighting, and Malcolm X had exposed Elijah Muhammad as an adulterer and a pedophile, by the way. And so Elijah Muhammad had reason to take out Malcolm in 1965 when he was shot to death at the Audubon Ballroom in Harlem. But the FBI, as you said, had a file on Malcolm X since 1953, when he was very young, right out of prison, and was just this up-and-coming organizer in the Nation of Islam, which had about 500 members in it at the time, nationwide. That's how big the NOI was then. They had a file on him then. By 1965, he was a huge figure, and he was in the media, and the Nation of Islam then had 40,000 members. So he was effective at recruiting and organizing people into a Black radical nationalist organization. And he was leading the emergent Black Power movement at the time. People were fired up about Malcolm X. And so the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover, we know, was capable of doing just about anything and hated the guts, especially of Black radicals. And this is why he sicked the FBI and Martin Luther King. This is why he sicked the FBI and the Black Panthers. And so if he didn't have anything to do with the assassination of Malcolm X, I would be surprised, because it was certainly comported with who J. Edgar Hoover was, and it was certainly in his interest. And that's the people BLM, FBI. That's the people that Black Lives Matter and the left and Joe Biden and Spike Lee love nowadays. They love them, the FBI. How degraded and corrupt and idiotic can we possibly be?
And as you talk about in the class, Malcolm X was the foremost opponent of the racial liberalism movement. Those like you could not have JFK, you cannot have LBJ if Malcolm X succeeds. You cannot have the civil rights movement. Yeah,
that's it. Oh my, yes, exactly. He was the leading critic and virtually the only major black critic of integrationism and the civil rights movement and assimilationism, basically King's whole philosophy and nonviolence, all of it. He was thrown under the bus from the get-go. And so the liberals, the Democratic Party, who were writing that was their central plank, became their central plank domestically, was racial integrationism. They had every reason to take out Malcolm X. Malcolm X was the fly in their racial liberal ointment.
Yeah. So with the Biden ad talking about Charlottesville, just if you want to talk about the new speech that Biden just gave, just sub out Charlottesville with January 6th. And you have the same exact speech word for word.
Yep. I'm so glad we had Brandon Caserta on the show, because it's been just eating at me for a year and a half now. What's been done to the J6 defendants, and then of course the Michigan defendants like Brandon. I mean, just a complete frame up of poor people. That's, I mean, the two guys who got convicted for the Michigan kidnapping, which, by the way, the Michigan kidnapping plot was invented by FBI agents. They came up with the idea and then suggested the idea to these guys, one of whom was living underneath in the basement of a vacuum repair shop in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And if you think that guy had any social power whatsoever, you are mentally deficient. That's who they set up, has been poor people. There was a study done of the J6 defendants, and some huge percentage had declared bankruptcy and had other major financial crises. This is a setup of poor people. And because they're white and because they're right wing, you can do anything you want to them. They were put in solitary confinement. They've been held without a trial for a year and a half. Hello, Fourth Amendment. Why is this not a cause for outrage? Oh, because they're MAGA and because they're white. Because like Brandon, they have tattoos and they like heavy metal and they have guns. And especially because they like Trump. You can do whatever you want to them. I mean, I think they could be executed and most of the left would be fine with it. They're so bloodthirsty. They're so bloodthirsty about right-wingers who they know nothing about. Again, these are not Nazis. If they were Nazis, okay, fine. The Nazis are to be found, by the way, in Ukraine. They're the ones who are being supported by these liberals. But these J6 guys, these MAGA people, they are not Nazis. Not even close. And they have zero power. Zero power. Yet these liberals on MSNBC would be perfectly fine with sending them to the electric chair.
This last week, Gavin McInnes got, he faked his own arrest as a prank on his show. And it was a dumb joke. But one thing that it did show is all these liberals were so giddy to see him get arrested in real time. They're like, oh, I'm going to start drinking again. Time to celebrate. Trump got arrested. Now Gavin got arrested. And just today, people were asking for this footage. Here's Steve Bannon getting arrested.
For every conservative American, this is what happens the last days of a dying regime. They will never shut me up. They'll have to kill me first. I have not yet begun to fight.
But yeah, everybody's giddy. Thad, you froze. Can you hear me? Just me now. Okay, we might get Thad back. We might not. But yeah, everybody is super, super giddy on Twitter. They're literal demons as to how happy they are to see somebody get arrested and punishing their enemies. How's the chat doing? Trying to get Thad back. While we're waiting, I'm gonna play the footage from Germany. This is we're getting him back. Hey, did you catch that? Yep.
I'm back.
I can't hear you. Oh.
Can you hear me now?
Yep. Okay, we're good.
Okay, good. The deep state cannot keep me down.
Did you see what I just did with Bannon? How he just got arrested?
No.
Oh, I just played the Bannon footage. He
Okay.
did the John Paul Jones quote. I haven't even begun to fight. We were talking about how liberals on Twitter are just giddy seeing their political opponents get arrested.
Oh yeah.
Mhm.
Oh, there's nothing better. I mean, it's the politics of revenge. I mean, we know this, or ressentiment, according to Nietzsche. But it's, leftism has been the politics of ressentiment or revenge for a very long time. Resentment, envy, and they love nothing more because they believe that their political opponents are evil. And so when it's the devil, I mean, the devil must be done away with. There's no compromise, there's no negotiating, there's nothing. You just have to do away. You have to get rid of the devil. You have to destroy the devil. And it's a personal insult, the existence of someone who disagrees with them politically. So yeah, all the gloves are off, and Steve Bannon. I mean, again, can you imagine? I mean, if your average like college professor had got to decide what to do with Steve Bannon, I think they might execute him. I mean, that's how bloodthirsty. That's how bloodthirsty these very genteel bourgeois intellectuals are. That's really what they're about. They want to destroy their enemies. They're political, ideological opponents. These are people with no power over them whatsoever, but they will do away with them. They will crush them.
And when it comes
to this is what, yeah.
I was going to say, when it comes to censorship, they don't go after the bad ones or the ones who have, if you have like terms of service or like actual racism, they don't go after those people. They don't go after the Richard Spencers. They don't go after the David Dukes. They actually like to keep them around so you can have a scapegoat to go after every once in a while. What they do go after is they go after the effective ones. And if you want to convert a liberal to the MAGA way of thinking, the first thing you show them is the Steve Bannon, David Frum debate. And you realize, oh, maybe David Frum's a Nazi here. Maybe Steve Bannon actually is making some good economic populist points. If you want to convert a young man who just wants, if you want to convert a hipster to MAGA thought, show him Gavin McInnes. You might say, oh, man, I want to have fun. I want to be a punk rocker. You know what? Being offended and not laughing at things isn't fun or cool at all. Maybe this guy has something to offer. Yep.
Everyone, that Bannon debate was David Frum. That was the Monk debates. I think it was in Toronto. It was definitely in Canada.
Yes.
Maybe 4 or 5 years ago. And Bannon absolutely wiped the floor with him when the entire audience thought he was the devil. This was at the height of Bannon's infamy, by the way. This was early in the Trump administration. So he was considered Beelzebub to almost all liberals. And he gets up on stage and just wipes out David Frum. And everyone should please go watch that. And again, it's not like of course, I have major disagreements with Bannon. I think he's completely ass backwards on immigration and trade and lots of stuff. Cultural issues, of course, were completely different. But on a lot of issues and the issues they argued about in that debate, Bannon is the man, and he's very brilliant and really understands how to appeal to a broad audience. And he really understands how to reach out to people across the political divide, people who don't agree with him. He's great at talking to liberals and leftists. And people underestimate that about him. If given the chance, he will convert a lot of people who are on the left. I think he already has, actually. Mm-hmm. And he has them on his show all the time.
Yeah.
But yeah, so he's effective. That's right. I mean, he's very effective. Bannon. Well, God, I mean, look what he's done with, I mean, in about a year and a half, strictly through the war room, he has built MAGA as a movement, independent of Trump. They're the ones who are going to take Congress. I mean, they're the reason the Republican Party is even alive now. It is a massive nationwide movement that is fast growing. It is very excited. They're very excited. There's just all sorts of vitality and energy in the MAGA movement, whether you like it or not. Mm-hmm. And that's almost all because of Bannon running the show.
So Biden in his speech is demagoguing MAGA Republicans. He's not demagoguing Trump as much anymore. He's demagoguing MAGA Republicans. So Steve Bannon is the general in charge now.
Yeah, he should. I mean, from his point of view, because that's where the problem is for him. It's the MAGA. It's a mass movement now. Until 2017, 2018, it was just Trump. It was Trump and his voters. But Bannon saw this. He saw the energy there, and he organized it into a movement. It's the biggest and most effective radical social movement in this country since the 1960s. That is very clear to me. And we have to take it seriously as such. But that is exactly right. Why they took out Bannon, because he's done that, because he's been so effective. He's done, who cares? I mean, even if he did embezzle money from the whatever it's called, build the wall thing, do we really need to? I don't care. I mean, I don't think
he stole money from the people you hate. How bad is that, right? Like
whatever. Yeah, I mean, they're grasping at straws. They'll take anything they can get. Mm-hmm. This Rick Wilson guy, this Lincoln Project guy, he is just the biggest scumbag I've ever witnessed in American politics, which is saying so much. These people, the leaders of the anti-Trump movement, are so obviously dishonest and corrupt and driven by some other agenda. I mean, Malcolm Nance. I mean, they are just absolute fools. Unfortunately, they have major power, major funding, and places on all the major networks. Mm-hmm. So, yeah.
Yeah. And to any of those communist viewers that we have, who is leading the working class revolutionary movement right now? And who is leading a reactionary oppressive movement right now? It's literally in those terms, as you can see it playing out in front of us.
Yep. Bannon, all the MAGA people, they use the term working class all the time. And that's because they, in fact, represent working class people. Working class people are who make up the MAGA movement. It is not a bourgeois movement. It's not a ruling class movement. It's not a movement of the economic elite. Even the big spokespeople within it have working class backgrounds. And Trump himself, even though he was born a rich kid, one of the reasons he became so popular is that he speaks like a working class person. His cultural sensibilities are working class. Class is a cultural category as well as an economic one, and Trump understood that, and so he plays up, or maybe it's just the way he is.
He's a member of the WWE Hall of Fame. He understands the working class.
That's it. That's almost the entire. And he was on a reality show.
Yeah,
I mean, that's who watches those things, is working class people, right? So, and he talks like them, and he has the same interests as they do, and similar values, but just general sort of affect is very working class, is very sort of Queens working class. And that's why the movement is what it is. Steve Bannon, his father was a telephone company lineman. I mean, that's where he comes from. So that's who this is, again, for better or worse. But, if you're a Marxist and you keep talking about the working class, or a socialist, keep talking about the working class, yeah, you need to go look at the Republican Party right now as the party of the working class.
Yeah, I live on a college campus, and the only time I've ever seen a Make America Great Again hat. I don't see it on the Republican trolls. They don't dare wear it ever. The only time I see it is on the janitors. That's the only time I've ever seen. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay, we're wrapping up. Do you have any comments on Her Majesty's passing today?
God save the Queen, fascist regime.
Yeah.
The words of the Sex Pistols, I think, still apply.
I think, yeah, as anti-imperialist as we are, and once you start looking into the Queen and what was going on with the British Empire in 1952 when she came to power in a certain place called Kenya, it's hard to have sympathy for her. But at the same time, though, her job has been to just look cute and act dignified for 70 years. So
I mean, she was forced to take the job.
Yeah.
I mean, she was born into the thing. She never knew any better. She had no choice in the matter, really. I mean, she could have abdicated, I suppose, like some of her predecessors. In fact, I think her father, right? Or was it grandfather? One of them abdicated right before her. Yeah. I mean, the interesting thing about Elizabeth, I think, is that she kind of made her name as a monarch by traveling around the world and spending a lot of time in the former and current British colonies in the third world. She was kind of the third world queen. And, a lot of it was symbolic, didn't mean much, but she kind of made a good big show out of helping. And this is where Princess Diana came in too, right? She did the same thing. She made a huge show of being the queen of the brown people.
Shaking hands with Nelson Mandela.
Yeah, the queen for the brown people. I mean, they were like, she'd had parades in every like third world capital, and people would throng the streets, and many of them loved her for that. But the idea that they needed to do that, right? That was seen as necessary. This is during the 1950s, when at the height of the anti-colonial liberation movement in the third world and Africa, all these former British colonies, people were rising up and overthrowing the the colonial masters. She understood. I mean, that's what she was trying to do. She was trying to stop that, or try to like say, okay, now that you have your nation, brown and black people, please don't fuck with us, and don't join with the Soviets. Most importantly, it was all symbolic, but that's what it was. That it was sort of it was a testament to how powerful that movement was, the anti-colonial movement of the 50s and 60s.
And you want to talk about the fall of an empire and the decline of the Western Empire? King Charles.
That guy, his stuff on climate change is so wacky. He is a silly man. He's got some very funny ideas. I mean, they're not even mainstream climate change ideas. I forget what it is, but he has some estate in the country, and he grows all of his own food or something there. And I don't know. It's just, they're completely isolated, cut off from the real world. I mean, you become weird and crazy when you're like trapped in a palace all day long. I sort of feel sorry for them. Yeah. Again, they're born into it. They were born into it. It's like being born a slave, really. I mean, they don't have much choice, and they know if they abdicate, they get just absolutely slammed by everyone. I mean, the king who abdicated before Elizabeth, he's like everyone hated him and still hates him, and he's like the shame of the country. That's what you get. So it's really coercive, and I feel sorry for them. I do, for the monarchs. I also think that the institution should be abolished. I certainly wouldn't want to pay for it. Can you imagine that? So your tax money going to these people's beds and palaces and servants and maids and chauffeurs. I mean, okay.
Yeah, very, very weird.
Yeah,
but yeah, it's also this weird ongoing reality show. Like whenever there's a wedding, or like when we pretend to care every like 5 years whenever something happens.
Right. It's the British Hollywood. That's what the monarchy has been since World War II, since they lost their power, their political power. They serve the same function as our celebrities here, whatever that. I'm not even exactly sure what that function is, but that's what they do. That's how people treat them.
Which is why they aren't marrying into our royalty; they're marrying into our celebrities.
That's right. Yeah. That's why they all live in Hollywood now, in Beverly Hills. That's right.
Cool. Ready to hand it over?
Yeah, so if we are going to go to Unregistered Live right now, if you want to hang out with us and talk about all these things live in person on Zoom, I should say on Zoom, go to patreon.com/unregistered and become a member at any level, and you'll get the link. Oh, we got to put the link up. I'll put the link up right now. And
we go live in 10 minutes.
We go live in 10 minutes, plenty of time. So go become a member if you're not, and the link for Unregistered Live will be up there shortly. And we'll see you there.
Cool.
Thank you, Michael.
Thanks.
You're awesome.